Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am super excited because I have Michael Coe from Gamelyn Games here, and he is going to talk to us about Gamelyn Games and Kickstarters and all that good stuff. So thanks for joining us, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Oh,
Appreciate the
absolutely.
opportunity.
I'm super excited. Um, for those who don't know, you've been in the Kickstarter scene for a long time with all of the Tiny Epic games and just to many people, who just look at you, hit after hit after hit on Kickstarter, and just tons of these games. And the Tiny Epic games are the small game, big games in a small box. I don't know if that's the exact tagline.
Very close.
Very close. But so just to start, whenever I have somebody on, I think it's always important to see how people got into Kickstarter and gaming and becoming a publisher. And so, I mean, Michael, how did you get into this? What's your little narrative or story?
Yeah, so I've grown up a gamer, right? I love games. I'm from the '80s. Games are just kind of the big thing for just about anybody that grew up during those years. And but I was never a board gamer, really. I played family board games, just as a kid, and then probably the most serious game I ever played was like Hero Quest. But even then, I was a bit too young when it came out to really wrap my mind around what was going on. But when the big kind of gateway games came over, like Settlers of Catan and Ticket to Ride, things of that nature, I was not in that scene. Any of my gaming at that time would have been video gaming and PC gaming. So I really don't have what I would consider like a hobbyist's kind of background. But I knew I loved games, and I knew that that's where my real passion was. So at the time that I kind of started in the industry, I was actually working at a restaurant. I was bartending. I was doing some front of the house management. Just kind of came up from serving there for a few years, and I knew that I didn't want to keep doing that the rest of my life. And so, I was trying to decide, what am I going to do? My wife actually introduced me to a motivational speaker, and I listened to some of his content, and it really inspired me to stop wasting my free time and try and do something more valuable with it, something that would kind of progress my life forward. And I was actually in a Dell training class for some tech support, and this was back in 2008, I want to say.
All right.
And somebody had mentioned that their brother got a board game signed by some company. And at this time, the board game industry was not in a boom or anything like this. So,
Right.
I mean, this was pre-Kickstarter boom, board games, but nonetheless, it kind of resonated with me. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. I mean, if that's like a real thing, like people actually still design games and other companies like sign them, that like I didn't think that was like a real thing.
Yeah.
I just figured there was these staple companies, and they just did all the games and they designed them all in house. But I didn't none of that. I didn't like act upon that at that time, but it was kind of in the back of my mind. So in 2010, I got the idea that I wanted to try my hand at going into the game industry, and I don't have any software experience or any sort of education in making video games or nearly the kind of capital it takes to do that. But I figured I could take games around the house, chop them up, cannibalize them into my own board game, and go more the analog way to get started, right?
Sure.
So that's what I did. So I designed this huge game, and because I, am not a hobbyist, and because I was born and raised on American board games, lo and behold, it was a roll and move. So it should be no
We all
surprise
started
there.
with rolling moves. Come on.
That's right. So but I spent a lot of time on it. I didn't have a lot of money by any means. My wife was serving tables, and so between the two of us, we had nothing. But I spent pretty much every free penny I had reiterating prototypes and going down to Kinko's and reprinting every time I make a word
Nice.
change, and just really blowing money on it. But I kind of cut my teeth on the process. So in 2011, actually, I went to Gen Con with the game. So I've been working on it for a little over a year. And my wife and I emptied our bank account down to zero and went to Gen Con. We pitched the game to a ton of different publishers, all of which turned it down. And I remember the last day of Gen Con, Jay Tomlinson had just turned it down, and for good reason. And I was just like, well, what in the heck, are we going to do? We had we had spent everything on this, as you know, and at that time I had seen myself going into the industry as a game designer, not as a publisher.
Right.
But nobody wanted this game, and I wasn't, super eager to sit and design a new one. But after a little bit, so there
Well,
I actually
and just
met,
to interrupt for a quick second,
yeah,
I think, again, as far as things people should cue into when they are listening, right? That idea, humble beginnings, following your passion, right? Not necessarily in the best direction for where the industry was in terms of the type of design and stuff, but just that idea of, I thought, you're talking about that motivational speaker and using your free time. I just think I just want to double down on that. A lot of people wonder how I can get a lot done, and people get a lot done, and a lot of it's just using your time, right? You can sit around and just play and play and play, but you'd be amazed how much you can get done if you use that time towards a goal and towards bettering yourself and moving forward. So, I think it's a huge deal. As is, I mean, I had no idea you guys basically went for broke to pitch this game at Gen Con. I mean, that's, I can imagine how, not depressing might not be the right word, but deflating it is to sort of build up to that and then have it not succeed. Now, there's got to be some pivot in the story because we know where you are now. But so then what happened?
well, so yeah, we were all in, but then it gets even a little bit worse. But so I end up meeting up with somebody that is pretty beloved in the industry. A lot of people know Patrick Nickel. I met him at Gen Con. He was managing a board game store in Arizona at the time where I was living. And I wanted to bring my game down to his store because they had like open game night. So I wanted to be able to show it around. So I met up with him at Gen Con. I showed him the game, and he's like, this is really cool. It's got some really good roots. He's like, I want to get out of managing a game store. And I'm like, well, I kind of want to get out of, the restaurant business. So together we decided we were going to found a game publishing company and go to Kickstarter. But and so that ultimately was Crash Games. But the game I currently had was too big, so we needed to do something a bit more practical,
Sure.
So that we didn't have to have a lofty funding goal. At that time on Kickstarter, the biggest success I want to say was Alien Frontiers, like 30,000 or something like that.
Right.
So I went back to the drawing table. I designed a small abstract strategy called Rise. And that was the first Kickstarter that I did. This was back in October of 2011. So we launched that, and about halfway through, it was not doing really well. We packed our bags. We drove from Arizona to Texas to BGG Con, and just, boots on the ground, guerrilla marketing.
Sure.
We put it in as many people as we could, and we barely funded the project, just a little bit over our goal, which actually was not enough to produce the game. Okay. So I had a loan on my car, but I still had a little bit of wiggle room. So I went back to the bank. I took a new loan out of my car, turned that into cash. We finished the production of the game, and then we tried again. We went back to Kickstarter with one more, and then one more, and then just right around the time of about a year, Patrick and I ultimately decided we were going to go our own ways in the industry and try to do our own things. And so Patrick kept Crash Games, and I kept my second design, which was called Dungeon Heroes, and that was going to be the kind of the flagship or the start of what is now Gamelyn Games.
Right.
So,
I didn't realize you had such a history with Patrick and Crash Games. I mean, again, I think when most people look at you, they just see Tiny Epic, and that's where the story began, right? But it's so not true. And let's so Patrick goes on and he does Crash Games for a while, which at some point or another runs out of steam, and we'll skip that story. But so you split off. You've learned a bunch. You've done Kickstarter, and you've got this game. You said Dungeon. What was the name of it?
Dungeon Heroes.
Dungeon Heroes. And so
the crazy thing is that Patrick and I actually split in the middle of that campaign. So we launched that campaign under the Crash Games logo, and we had to post an update saying that the company is splitting, right? Like, and this game is going to go to a different publisher, which is just a wild thing to do in the middle of a project. But then things got even more trivial for me because I had to now start from scratch. A lot of the goodwill that came from Crash Games, kind of like you alluded to, didn't follow me to Gamelyn Games. People didn't know who I was. Patrick was kind of the face of Crash Games, and so I had to really start from scratch all over again. And my wife told me she's pregnant, and so this is going to be our first baby, and neither of us has insurance.
Oh man,
We had,
jeez.
we had exactly $3,000 saved up in the bank, and part of this was kind of left over from some of the games as well. But that's all we had, and so we call up this center where they're going to do like a natural delivery because we couldn't afford a hospital, and they're like, coincidentally, it's going to cost $3,000. It's like the exact amount. It was really crazy.
I mean, I think the bill when my kids were born was like 25 grand. I mean, that's crazy.
So they'll do like the ultrasounds, the meetups, and then the delivery, a natural delivery for $3 grand. So I've got that as option A, and then option B, the restaurant is like, all right, you're doing a great job. You've been with us a long time. We want to make you a full-time front of the house manager. We're going to give you your own store. We're going to start your training on Monday, and it's going to come with benefits. You'll get insurance. Your wife will be covered. You can have a baby in a hospital, right? So it's like, holy smokes. So I've got these two options to consider, and I'm trying to restart a board game business. And so, I asked my wife, I'm like, what do you want to do, right? And she's like, you got to follow your passion. She's always been so supportive.
You have an amazing wife. I've never met her, but that is amazing support.
She's phenomenal, and always has been. Such an inspiration. So that's what I mean. It was a really tough decision, and I lost a lot of sleep over it. But we ended up paying the $3,000 for the center, and I refused the management job, and I went full steam into Gamelyn Games, and struggled through a couple of Kickstarters. Dungeon Heroes finished out all right. I launched another one of my designs called Fantasy Frontier, which did all right. And then I did some accessory products. None of these things were big successes, and none of them made any sort of money.
So was it really the Tiny Epic that kicked it off?
That was what kicked it off. Absolutely. So in October of 2013, I put out on Twitter, for the first time, we're accepting submissions from outside designers, let us publish your game kind of thing. And then that's when Scott Alms wrote into me with a game called Tiny Epic Planets. And so, and that's kind of how I figured that was going to be for like new designers or new publishers. If you've never done anything, it's hard to get any sort of notable designer that's got a talent to submit.
Yeah, that was really early for Scott. I mean, since he's prolific, but I mean that must have been one of his. Was that his first published game, or had
before then he had Martian Dice and Kings of Air and Steam.
Okay.
So he did have a couple of games with TMG prior to that. But even getting somebody that's got a couple published games to allow a no-name, no credibility publisher to do something is really hard. And so that's why I spent a lot of time designing and publishing my own games, just to show that I had the competency of taking concept to shelf.
Right.
And after I had done that a couple times, then I opened it up. And when I played Tiny Epic Planets, I printed it out and I played it with my wife. And I remember we were just so moved by it because I was already wrapping my mind around and really getting into the philosophy of smaller games that pack a larger punch. Dungeon Heroes is very much that way. Some would even jokingly call it kind of the Tiny Epic before Tiny Epic.
Sure.
But that was something I was already really interested in, and Tiny Epic Planets really captured that. It was so approachable. It was so easy to get into, but it really had a lot of meaningful decisions. But I went back to him and I was like, I love the game. I'm really impressed, but I'm not as interested in just one random alien race against another random alien race. Would you consider changing the theme to like a fantasy theme, and we could do like orcs and dwarves and elves versus humans and things of that nature, right? And his very next response was not, well, give me some time, I'll think about it. He emailed me the next day, and he'd already rewritten all the factions. He had already retitled it to Tiny Epic Kingdoms. And that kind of passion and drive really impressed me. That's the kind of person I like to work with. And so I was like, all right, man, if you're that committed and you're willing to be flexible, let's do it. So we signed the game in October of 2011, and then started, or I mean 2013, and then started developing it, and we launched it on Kickstarter in January of 2014. And so that's when a lot of people would kind of perceive Gamelyn began, at least with
Right.
any real success, was in the beginning of 2014.
Well, and,
Um,
and actually, I mean, that's where, if we just like, it's always also amazing to see how compressed this stuff is. It's like, oh, you were sort of small, no one knew about you in 2014, and now it's in 2017, and you've had these monster campaigns, and you've been doing so well as an organization, and you're so well known. But, um, so then you do the series of the Tiny Epic games, right? And they're building on each other, and they're getting bigger. So I'm just going to sort of the big chunk of history that people sort of have seen and experienced with the Tiny Epic franchise. Sort of to fast forward through some of that, because I actually think the how you got to that point was really the powerful part for listeners, or viewers, I guess. But so you obviously you hit on a good thing. You're hitting on a good thing. You're moving through. We did the Q&A with Ben, and he latched on as well. And Ben Schulman has been doing quite a lot of work for you guys. Um,
yeah,
and so you're driving on that success, and then at some point with Scott, you guys, this is I think it was your last campaign. Maybe you've done another one since, but I don't think so. Where you can correct me, of course. With Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, you go from the Tiny Epic, all the various Tiny Epic Western and Galaxies and all those ones, to this big monster game. What happened there, and what were some of the struggles you guys went through as you transitioned?
yeah. I knew it was going to be a challenge. But I didn't know it was going to be as much of a challenge as it was. That one really kind of took me off guard, to be honest. Scott and I had been discussing a big game even ever since Tiny Epic Kingdoms, because I had a passion. I wanted to make a big game at some point, but I knew it was going to take a lot of resources, and I knew that it was going to take a lot of time. So we've been working on Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea for a year and a half, 2 years, probably a little over 2 years, and we felt like, okay, now is the time to kind of transition and try our hand at something quite different, right? I mean, it's like doing 5 Tiny Epic games just in the amount
It
of
was a
art
monster.
assets. And
Yeah.
it's just such a huge, huge, huge game. I can't even say that enough. Um, and I knew that the market for big games was different than the market for the current games I was producing, but I didn't realize quite how different those two markets were. So when I launched Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, and I launched it at what was within industry standard margins for pricing, plus a discount for Kickstarter, I just got skewered a little bit because the sticker shock was so bad for the backers that I had built up around my
Right.
company through the Tiny Epic games. They were expecting, they've been backing $24, $25 games from me since Tiny Epic. And so for me to lay out this giant game where if you're all in, it's going to cost you north of $250, that didn't go over well, to say the least.
Well, it's a huge
And
it's a huge shift, right? I mean, again, these are people your audience has you've trained them to get these incredible. You sort of were blowing out the cheap. Like I know on campaigns of mine, you guys always were putting all this pricing pressure on everybody because you were delivering so much content for so cheap. It would be like people would be like, "Well, Game was charging $19 for like." Twice as much as you're charging $19 for. What's going on? So you really had owned that low cost, high value category, and then so for that audience, this is just this 5x shift to this still high value, I'm sure, but much more expensive.
yeah, and its value is incredibly high. I mean, it's, full in, you're getting 176 miniatures and just tons and tons of 3D constructs. I mean, value to dollar, it's still just as good of a deal as the Tiny Epic games. It's just in a whole different market.
Right.
And that it's just like if you go to a $10 steakhouse and it's packed on a Friday night, you go to a $90 steakhouse and it's packed on a Friday night, right? Like the crowds are there, but they have different expectations. and they want different things from that restaurant, right? And so that was the part where I wasn't quite prepared, and so I didn't. I don't think I presented it the best that I could have, but also I'm really dedicated to backer involvement in my campaigns. I take it very seriously. I listen and read every comment. And so, they were letting me know, hey, this is way too expensive. We're your loyal fan base. Can you make something more reasonable for us?
Right, you did that
And so I
major
started.
reboot.
So I started making these like mid-campaign shifts, and I came out with a standy version of the game that was going to be more affordable. But even then, it was still kind of on the cusp of what they wanted to spend. And so I started kind of being, I was just making quick decisions to try and accommodate. And ultimately, when I ran the numbers, it was going to just put me in the ground, and I wasn't going to be able to produce all these different versions of the game in low levels and have it make any sense at all. So really, I had just made some hasty decisions that were the wrong decisions, and I needed to own that. And so, I mean, as much success as Tiny Epic has had and as we have had on Kickstarter, I probably also own the award for having canceled the highest funded board game project that was successful. So, I mean, we were at $250,000, good amount past our funding goal when I pulled the plug on this project. I can't think of another board game company
Yeah,
that's
well,
canceled a
and
big project.
I think that you got. I mean, I didn't know the story behind the scenes, but clearly I saw the dancing you were starting to do in the campaign, and kudos to you for saying, you know what, guys, the game's going to be great. We're going to have an awesome product, but we're no longer in a place where this makes sense. I need to take some time to step away, figure out how to do this right, and come back to you, rather than just sort of be reactive, get it done, but not really deliver the quality and the experience that you want. Now, I haven't played the game, but I've seen it when you've been demoing at cons and stuff, and there's a lot. I think you were playing. I don't. It wasn't Gen Con. Maybe it was Origins. You were playing with some people. You were playing like 6 players. You had the whole thing set up, and it looked incredible. But
I couldn't be happier with how it's turned out, but it's been a rough road getting there. I canceled the project. I took a few months off. I restructured a lot of the stuff. So I didn't cut anything out of the game, but in the original launch, I had expansions that were split into different boxes. I combined them into one. I had some content that was in the base game that was 4 expansions that I pulled out and put into the expansion. So I was able to get the base game cheaper. I was able to get the expansion consolidated and cheaper. And then I relaunched at well below industry standard margin. So at this point, I'm taking a hit on it. Even right now, and I'll be candid, we ended up funding the project the second time around at just shy of $500,000. And I'm still in the red on this project. And even after I complete, deliver, and everything, and then even sell 80, 90% of what I produced, I'm still going to be in the red. I'm only going to be just barely in the black if I sell through all the extra units that I was able to produce, which is not very many, a fraction of what we normally can go to retail with. So this game has been a huge challenge for Gamelyn Games, but it's an investment for us because this isn't going to be the end of what people see of big box games from Gamelyn Games. We have a lot of exciting things planned with miniatures and combining them with cardboard constructs and just gigantic games that have magnificent gameplay, magnificent components. And so this is kind of the beginning of it. And just as we begin a new series, we have to kind of prove ourselves.
Yeah,
people,
for sure.
People that are in that miniatures buying market, they need to see that Gamelyn can produce big box games with miniatures at a level of quality that they want. And so this game is going to show that. When this game delivers, I think it's going to blow people's mind. And when we come back and we say, hey, look, let's try again and let's do this with another theme or another idea, I think people then will trust that we've got the wherewithal and the competency to do it, and we'll see more support.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, from hearing the whole story, you're gonna go for it, right? You're gonna go do what you want to do. You're gonna get it done. You're gonna make it happen. And being against the wall a little bit isn't you've certainly gone through a lot of hard decisions to get to where you are today. So I think you'll do just fine. And I'm looking forward to checking it out once it hits the
Well,
streets.
I'll
Um,
tell you, I'll tell you that it's never been about the money. It's always been about the content, and that's what we're so dedicated to. If it were about the money, we would have kept the first project. We lost money in this whole
yeah.
exchange, and we're going to lose a little bit more money still. But the content it has integrity. It's real content. It's from the heart, and it's just fantastic.
And that's what I love about all of the small publishers and indie publishers. I mean, you're sort of bigger than that in a sense, but at the same time, you know, all the Kickstarter creators, they're not in it in the same way that, once you're Asmodee or once you're these bigger companies, you're like companies with all these people and you're just feeding the machine. And I don't want to say there's all games are made with love, but I feel like at this sort of new Kickstarter created sort of indie publisher zone, you have so many interesting publishers and so many people doing great things that it's really, you know, I just think the content's awesome and special, and I think it's created such an opportunity for so much new stuff. Um, so I'm looking at the clock here, and I want to ask, well, so two things, and I actually may pause the video and start it again because I went through this whole I did a 40-minute Q&A with Mike Pascal, and like I had to. It was terrible. I didn't save it and stuff like that. So I'm going to need to be constant. But my first thing I want to ask you about. So you finished here. Well, you haven't finished, but you're sort of over the Kickstarter bump with Heroes. What's next? What's new from you guys? What's the next Kickstarter? What's coming out soon? Or what are you up to?
Well, people can definitely expect to see a lot more Tiny Epic and a lot more in the Heroes line. We're going to run kind of two series simultaneous. Tiny Epic, we have revisited Tiny Epic Defenders, which is the cooperative game in our series. And we have done some magnificent things to that game to really up its play, up the quality of the components. We're going to be actually borrowing the item meeples that we introduced in Tiny Epic Quest and bringing them into Tiny Epic Defenders with some innovation.
Those are awesome. Tiny Epic, by the way, I love Tiny Epic Quest. That was bravo. That game was great. Is great.
Thank you very much. And so we're going to bring Tiny Epic Defenders kind of up to par with the rest of the series. We're going to release an expansion with Tiny Epic Defenders. That's going to be hitting Kickstarter probably in just a little over a month from now, maybe 5 to 6 weeks from now. We expect to launch that on Kickstarter. And then starting in January 2018, we're going to have a new Tiny Epic title. And then we have some really exciting surprises for the Tiny Epic series in 2018, as well as the Heroes series. So
awesome.
They can expect.
It sounds like we're going to be overlapping. Sunset Over Water is probably going to be on Kickstarter around the time, 5 or 6 weeks from now. So I'll get to enjoy you siphoning all the attention, but it'll be cool. They're at least different. Before we go, I wanted to ask a few questions. So one, if we go back to the beginning of the video and go back to sort of the story before Tiny Epic, if you were to sort of boil that down to an idea or two or advice for a new creator, somebody who's coming from whether it's restaurants or retail or just a different space in general, who wants to get into games and follow their passion. I mean, obviously, as time passes, Kickstarter's a little harder to get into now than it was back then. But setting all that aside, what's your key advice for somebody who's fresh and new and wants to get in?
I would sum it all up to don't get immobilized. And then that I would break down into a few different things. So, because there's a few easy things that can kind of slow an early designer down. And one of those things are their concern of other people copying their work if they show it off. So they may be afraid to put it out on BGG. They may be afraid to show it at conventions without having people sign non-disclosure agreements. And they're worried about that, right? I'm just going to say, in the years that I've been in this industry, people are not stealing other people's ideas. Publishers are very creative people. They're limited on time. They don't have enough time to make all their own ideas, let alone the risk of trying to steal somebody else's idea. And this is a small community. That kind of stuff is going to go out. It's going to spread fast, and it's going to make the publisher look like a tool and nobody's going to work with that person anymore. Like, it's just not happening. So don't be afraid to get your idea out there, because that's how you're going to get people excited. You have to get people excited. You have to first build a little bit of a community around your game before going to Kickstarter. Don't think that the marketing starts at Kickstarter. You have to start your marketing long before Kickstarter. And then once you've got it built up through social media, through going to conventions, then you launch your Kickstarter. So that would be the first thing I would say, and don't get immobilized in that way. And you don't have to also worry too much about things like patenting or trademarking or things of that nature. Now we have started to do things like that as Gamelyn Games, but it's taken years to get to a position where it makes any sense for us to do that. In the beginning, we never concerned ourselves with that at all. And it's never really been even a worry. So I would say don't worry about that. Get yourself out there. Put a free version of your game out on BGG. There's a very active community there that loves to download print and play them. They love to provide their feedback. They don't know you, so their feedback will be legit and honest, at least in that sense. And so, putting it out there, getting that blind play testing, and don't be so in love with your content that you're not willing to change it. I always kind of draw an analogy to movies in this way, where if you watch a director's cut of a movie, it's honestly a worse version than the theatrical release of the movie, because the director is in love with his footage. And so all the things he holds on to more footage than he needs. And it really doesn't make for a better movie. You need that editor that can come in. They've got, an objective point of view. They cut stuff out. They cut it down to what's going to keep the tempo and the pace. And so as a designer, if you're working with a publisher, then hopefully that publisher is that editor, and they'll cut it down and let them do that. But if you're trying to self-publish your designs, then you really need to be careful, and you need to make sure that you're taking the advice of the playtesters and of the blind playtesters in particular that are providing feedback for your game, and don't be so in love with your game to be unwilling to change it for what people are looking for. And always remember the motto. This is something that we stick to at Gamelyn Games. When it comes to making a game, you want more fun faster. So when you see that certain elements of your game are fun, cut out the rest and do more and get to it faster of what was fun.
That's actually a great line, like more fun faster. I've heard similar things. I didn't know that you guys subscribe to that so much, but it is a great way to think about things. In free to play and mobile games, we look at it all the time because everyone's just leaving. But we were doing a Gen Con. I was playing some guy's prototype, and it was this really exciting tank game that, like, he was sort of going through everything, and we were all like, we just want to play. Like, can we play now? Like, stop. We're really excited, and he just kept adding rules. Just stop, man. We want to play. Like, why can't you let us play? And he just kept, and by the end of it, it was like, dude, you had us 3 times over, and you're still explaining side rules and stuff. So I think that idea of find the fun, find it fast, get people playing is fantastic. Also, clearly with Scott, had he been reluctant to change from planets to kingdoms that fateful night or whatever evening, he was up until 2 a.m. I mean, that set into motion this huge line of success, and it was that willingness to have feedback and work together and all that stuff. So I think that's incredible advice, as well as the don't get immobilized, just be willing to be out there, have a thick skin, all of that stuff. I think that's huge. And so that's sort of advice for sort of that new person. If we travel down, because there's a range of Kickstarter creators. If we travel down to this other side of the spectrum, at a creator who's maybe done a game or two, or is sort of establishing themselves and wants to transition to something new, they want to go from family weight to a war game, or they want to go from small to big, or they've been doing all these big games, they've been doing miniatures, and now they want to do a card game, or whatever. Like, if Green Couch Games is suddenly like, we want to do a giant Euro game, like what would you? Because what advice would you give to help somebody make that step, but be as smart as possible doing it?
Don't go into it broke. I'll tell you that, because reality bites, and you're going to need to have a little bit of cushion, because you're going to it's going to be difficult. And don't be afraid of failure, though, in the sense that don't just think that, oh, if, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to fail, right? Like failure is part of the recipe to success. So you're going to fail a little bit. And as much as we have found so much success on Kickstarter, we had a big flop with the initial release of the game, and we failed that initial release. And that's all right. I learned a lot, and I took a step back and I redid it. And so I would just say that, somebody who's wanting to kind of make a change like that, be prepared for some pushback, be prepared for some failure, and don't expect the majority of your current consumers to follow you in this new adventure. You may get some crossover, but you're going to have to approach it like you're starting a brand new company. You're going to have to approach it like you're starting from ground zero, and you need to rebuild a whole new community based around this new thing that you're doing. So,
and so I saw you at Gen Con. You had the booth, and you guys sold out. I think I walked by on Sunday, and you had nothing at your booth anymore. It was sort of hilarious.
We sold out 3 times. We sold out on Thursday. We airship or overnighted stuff for Friday. We sold out overnighted stuff for Saturday, and then sold out on Sunday. And
I just gave up. But so when you were at Gen Con and 50, and you saw everything, I mean, you guys when you have a booth, you're really sort of locked to the booth. But you've got when you think of the next year of gaming, when you think of now and a year from now, what are you most excited about when you look at the game industry right now?
I'm just excited to see its growth. What I'm starting to recognize, or at least notice in the gaming industry and the growth that it's going through, is that people are starting to see that this really is a quality form of entertainment. I think that it took a while for people who were playing, other games or video games or just doing other things with their entertainment money in general, before they really were willing to subscribe to the board game industry, and they were kind of just watching from afar and maybe playing their other friends' games or whatnot. But I think a lot of people are now buying into the industry because of what you actually said earlier, that the rise of the indie market has really brought forth some tremendous content, and it's been passion-driven content, not money-driven. We're not all people with business degrees anymore. Now we're just passionate gamers making games for other gamers. And it's taken a bit, but that's finally, I think, taken hold with a lot of the consumers. They see that now and they trust that now. And I also think that a lot more game publishers are recognizing the value in games like Tiny Epic that are approachable, that have approachable rule sets, because they're seeing that we want to share this passion and community of ours with other people, but it's hard to do that with big, huge games. And so we're starting to see more kind of gateway style games that are coming out, and definitely designers are in tune with trying to make their games embrace that more fun, faster idea. And so I'm excited just to see that grow. I'm excited to see more gateway style games come out. Even games in big boxes that are approachable, which I feel Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea and the whole Heroes series is going to embrace that. That's why we continue to work with Scott Alms, is because he's got a knack for those really simplistic rules engine, and then the strategy unfolds from there. So we stuck with that idea even in our big box game. It's very approachable for what it is. But I'm just excited to see more of that come out.
Awesome. And yeah, he's great at having a simple engine and then just hooking in these sort of standard, whether they're gold cards or missions or what. He knows how to bolt them on, but do it in a way that feels really good. Like he's definitely making some great stuff. So awesome. I'm excited too. It's going to be a great year. We're looking forward to more from Gamelyn, and thanks for the time. I think this was great.
Cool. It was my pleasure, Ed. It really was. Thanks.
Awesome. So thanks everybody, and we will be back. Awesome.